Hey chess friends, I hope you are doing well. Today, I have come with a new game to share with you, AlphaZero vs Stockfish. In this game that I am going to illustrate, I will share the chess strategies that AlphaZero employed to paralyze the whole chessboard and sacrifice his bishop. That was just wonderful. So, let's get started without wasting any time. Alpha started the game with d4. We have e6, e4 followed by d5, and knight to c3. Alpha is controlling the center. Knight f6 follows in the game to attack the pawn. Now, Alpha played e5, and the knight moves back to the d7 square. My idea is to push forward the pawn to the c5 square to attack the center. Alpha played f4 here, initiating his big center space, which creates some liability squares for the king, but at the same time, he has a strategy to put the rook on f1 to break the f-file with f5. Now, c5 follows in the game to attack the d4 pawn, and as the game progresses, we see c takes d4, rather than Alpha considering knight takes d4, he decided to move his knight to the b5 square to put more pressure on the pawn. Bishop to b4 check follows in the game, and we have bishop to d2, slapping the bishop. I just move back my bishop to protect the pawn. Here, Alpha played b4, directly invading the queen side. As the bishop moves back and the game progresses, I offer a knight exchange. But Alpha just denies it with c3. He wants to develop his pawn structure, protect his center, and simultaneously open up the queen's diagonal. a5 follows in the game to attack the pawn on the b4 square with full pressure. We have b5, and some knight exchanges happen in the game. You can see that Alpha has strongly built a great pawn wall structure. We have knight to b6 to secure these outposts for the knight. a4 and knight to c4 follow in the game, protected by the pawn. Do you think you should capture the knight on the c4 square? Let me examine the variation. If you dare to capture the knight, then after the capture, of course, you can take back the pawn. But white will likely play castle, and after b6, queen c2 attacking the pawn. Black will likely play bishop to b7 to get access to this diagonal. Black sacrifices the pawn to make frequent use of the rook, queen, and dark squared bishop. Black's pieces will be just very bold and active. So, going back to the variation, Alpha didn't capture the knight. Instead of that, he played bishop to d3 because he knows the vulnerabilities behind every move. He loves piece activity. At this point, Alpha cannot capture the knight with the queen because it will trap the queen in front of the king with bishop to b4. That's the reason why, in this position, we have king takes d2, and this initiates the pawn cloud opening by AlphaZero. You can see that king to e3 follows in the game, and the king is just protected by the pawn wall structure. I have no knights to threaten the white king, and that is a very good point for Alpha. As the game progresses, we have g4 on the board, that stops me from castling kingside. Now, we have h5 attacking the pawn. A few moves later, you can see that I have an open option to consider short side castling. But can I do that? Let me show you the variation. Then, Alpha will likely play queen to h5, getting the h7 square for checkmate. Therefore, you have to play g6. And then Alpha will sacrifice the bishop on g6. A few moves later, the black king will be completely devastated. After king g7 followed by rook g1, the black king will be just dead lost, and it will be checkmate in 2 moves. So, going back to the variation, we discovered that playing short side castle would be a very bad choice. That's the reason why I decided to play bishop to f8 to protect the pawn. A few moves later, I would like to play long side castle if possible. Now, AlphaZero played rook to c1 to seize control over the file. We have the g6 move. Now the bishop can go to the g7 square, but the problem for me is that Alpha's pawn structure is placed on the dark squares. That is very significant, as it stops my bishop's activity. Even the light squared bishop is trapped behind the pawn structure. That is why AlphaZero's mind is just brilliant. He completely paralyzed the whole chessboard. As you can see here, AlphaZero wants to move his rook back on the c-file. Here, many chess players might consider bishop to g7. But can they really play this move? Let me show you the variation. A few moves later, after you play castle, AlphaZero will likely consider h5, attacking the pawn on the g6 square. A few moves later, you can see that the rook will go to the c7 square to get access to the 7th rank. This position will be just vulnerable a few moves later. As you can see, after the queen exchanges occur on the h4 square, AlphaZero has a passed pawn on g6 with the support of the knight. The bishop is active, the rooks are well positioned, and my bishop pair is just stuck behind the pawn structure. It will create no resistance for me, right? So, going back to the variation, we discovered that playing bishop to g7 would be a very bad choice. That's the reason why after the king moves, rook to c1 happens in the game, getting access to the c file. We have rook to c7 in the following moves. Rook b7 is coming with the idea of playing rook to c7 if possible, or Alpha can play queen to g5. As you can see, we have some rook exchanges, and rook to c6 follows in the game to attack the pawn and get access to this square. Bishop to b7 is played by me, and here is a question for you: should we capture the pawn on the b6 square? Let me discuss the variation. If you do that, then I will consider king to c7, trapping the rook. You will lose the rook and the game. So, going back to the variation, we have rook to c2, a few moves later, we have knight to g5. Bishop to e7 follows in the game, and here AlphaZero makes his bold move. Can you guess what brilliant move AlphaZero played here? The brilliant move that AlphaZero played is bishop takes g6, which is just a stunning move, a mind-blowing sacrifice. Can you capture the bishop? Let me show you the variation. If you do that, then after queen takes e6, checking the black king, and after a few checks later, e6 will follow in the game and the black king will be completely lost. It will be checkmate, right? So, let me share an inspirational quote in sudden with you. We are dying from overthinking, we are slowly killing ourselves by thinking about everything. Think, you can never trust the human mind anyway, it's a death trap. So, going back to the variation, we discovered that pawn takes g6 is a very bad choice. That's the reason why I first captured the knight on g5, after the capture and recapture happened in the game. Do you know what AlphaZero played here? Try to guess the move that AlphaZero considered. He played another mind-blowing move, f5. f5 directly challenges these pawns. Can you capture the pawn on f5? Let me show you the variation. If you do that, then queen to g7 check will arrive. You can see that the 7th rank will be completely paralyzed. I cannot play queen to e7 because of queen takes h8, the king also cannot move back because of queen to c7, which will lead to a checkmate. So, going back to the variation, we discovered that g takes f5 is a very bad choice. If you dare to consider e takes f5, capturing the pawn with another soldier, then queen to f6 will arrive. It attacks the rook and the pawn at the same time, and it also threatens to carry out some activities that will cause harm to the king's position. Alright, if the queen goes to the d8 square to secure the pawn, then the astonishing move will arrive with e6. And I will face tremendous problems because the king has literally only 2 squares to go to. If the king goes to the d6 square, then I will consider e7, attacking these pieces. If the king goes to the e8 square, then I can literally capture the rook, leaving your position vulnerable. So, going back to the position, we discovered that capturing the pawn on the f5 square or capturing it with another pawn would be a bad choice. That's the reason why we have rook to g8. A few moves later, you can see AlphaZero closes the position with f6, and the light squared bishop that I have is just stuck behind the structure. Also, all the pieces that I have are just stuck behind the structure and unable to do anything. AlphaZero just seized control over the paralyzed whole board. Here, I played queen to b4 to attempt a queen exchange. A few moves later, despite having an extra piece and extra material, the game is not winnable for me because the king is just going to the top of the hill. you can see here how AlphaZero's king made the Bongcloud move by going to e3, step by step. He arrived at the e7 square, reaching the top of the mountain. This is the hill station where AlphaZero's king is resting, successfully climbing both the hill and the rating. If I capture the pawn, he will just push forward the pawn, leaving the position completely winnable for him. He just needs to capture these pawns, and it is simply winning for AlphaZero. Here, I resigned the game as AlphaZero wins. So, I hope you enjoyed the game very much. If so, then don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel, to see others. Grab a ticket, and see you soon.